on both the Forest Carbon Coalition's YouTube channel and the John Muir Project YouTube channel, and we will be sending out a link after the presentation. So back to Kathy. Kathy Egland is the co-founder and program director for Education, Economics, Environmental, Climate, and Health organization out of Mississippi. And she has been a powerhouse in addressing climate change and environmental injustice, and has been very focused on biomass logging in the Southeast. She recently co-authored an article in Truth Out entitled "Logging is Slashing U.S. Forest's Ability to Absorb Carbon by Over 1/3." She is also the chair of the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee of the National Board of Directors for the NAACP. So without further ado, Kathy, I will pass it off to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you so much for the poll. I can remember giving a presentation on this to a group, and I just assumed that they knew about wood pellets or biomass. And the first question that was asked was, what are wood pellets? So thank you for the poll. So I do know that the audience has some familiarity with this, so I won't have to go into too much detail as it relates to explaining about that. So you've given us a great start, and I'm trying to figure out how I can advance my slide here. Oh, I can do, I think it's up, but I'm putting enter, but it's not moving.
What about your arrow key? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, okay, did that. So, okay, so let me see if I can go back. So this is just a little bit, I've actually been to one of the facilities in Gloucester, Mississippi, and I've done a lot of research on this, and it's a very, very toxic process. From the cutting, shredding, drying, storage, shipping, the burning process. It's a very, very toxic process. There are, and one of the things that really, really troubles me is that the industry will not only claim that it's good for the climate, but they will also justify being able to have this hazardous and potentially deadly process, not only jobs, but communities who live at the fence line of these industries. And they will try to justify it by saying that they're giving people jobs. And I always say that earning a living wage should not have to kill or make people ill. These are just some of the chemicals during the manufacturing process that's emitted. And the facility that I mentioned earlier that I visited in Gloucester, Mississippi, was given a fine, a $2.5 million fine. Usually when these industries are fined, it's a drop in the bucket. It's basically a slap on the wrist. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. This is one, when I visited a facility, I was filming a documentary and I took my mask off. It was last year during COVID. I did not expect to have like a reaction, but suddenly I was, nauseated. My eyes, nose, and throat burned. And I just, I could not believe that that was happening within just a few minutes of standing there. And there are people who live right across the fence line from the manufacturing. I just happened to be there when they were loading some of the wood pellets onto the trucks to be taken to the ports and shipped over to the UK. You have methanol, also highly toxic. So this is a very flammable process. You have formaldehyde in this process that causes all of these symptoms. So these are the 4 largest companies in the US, Drax and Viva, Pinnacle and German pellets. Drax and Viva gets millions of dollars in subsidies for this process. I actually got this, the NAACP had a primer called Fossil Fuel Foolery. And I'm just amazed at how this is, that this industry is also greenwashing with this process. And so I call it forest fuel foolery because they are doing the same as fossil fuel, and it's much harm. As a matter of fact, Drax is the largest industry, and it's a former fossil fuel company that has converted to using forest fuel now. And this is all about, we actually need a just transition. This is not carbon free, as Rachel mentioned. They're actually doing a lot of co-firing with the wood pellets, and this actually prolongs the use of fossil fuel. So, and as Rachel mentioned earlier, this process emits as much CO2 as coal, and the GHGs are not properly accounted. And I just want to mention, I actually live in a disproportionate, an area that's disproportionately impacted by climate. I live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, just 5 to 8 minutes from the Gulf of Mexico. And I lost 2 of my dearest friends to drowning death during Hurricane Katrina. And I've been an avid climate activist, and I know that we need to transition our energy use, but we need to do it justly. This is one thing about this industry in the Southeast. This is where we have this rapid, this proliferation of this industry in the Southeast, and they're mostly located in EJ communities. I always like to show this map as a comparison because this is where most of these facilities, the overwhelming majority, are located. And it's in the same states that fuel the Industrial Revolution, the UK's Industrial Revolution. And this is where most of the wood pellets are being shipped. These are also, if you look at the map at the bottom, the states that are the most climate vulnerable. They're also the states with the highest poverty rates as well. And also the rates, if you look at these comparisons, are the maps with the highest Black population. This other map where you see the red dots, you see the yellow dots, these are where existing plants are, and the red dots are where proposed plants. And there are still lots of these plants that are being permitted. Our NAACP Just Energy Policies, and this was out, I think this was out like almost 10 years ago. The research showed that African Americans are more likely to live near biomass production plants and suffer from increased exposure to a number of dangerous emissions. So this is one of the newspapers. This is Gloucester, Mississippi, the area where I visited. And I was in this is called Blackman Hole, this trailer park area. And it is it's mere feet away from this facility. And I was standing at the fence, as I say, when they were loading some of the wood pellets onto these trucks. So basically, every time that I see where one of these industries have been fined, I always go and look at the demographics. And as you can see, Gloucester, Mississippi has an 85% Black population and a 68% poverty rate. These are some of the photos that I took while I was there, because just as I was getting into the city limits, you're looking at these log trucks, and you will see them because they come in. It's like a conveyor belt of trucks that comes in to these communities. And they claim, it really irritates me because when I've been to Europe and I've seen the advertisements, they will claim that they're using waste woods. And I've actually seen these whole healthy trees that have been cut. And this is the trailer part. These are other pictures, and I stood right near that fence. And this is one of the residents who live there. Again, this is just to give you an idea of some of the demographics that they have in Gloucester, Mississippi. And these kind of echo wherever you are. Now, a couple of things about the fines that were issued in Gloucester, Mississippi. It was $2.5 million, and the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality pat themselves on the back because it was the highest fine issued to date, which it still is for a single fine. However, to put that in perspective, that's about a day's worth of profit for 8 years of pollution. And Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality didn't even do the testing. It was the Environmental Integrity Project who actually did the testing and presented MDEQ with the evidence that they were emitting illegal levels of pollution. And then it took MDEQ over 2 years. It took drags. They lied and lied and lied until they were backed in a corner, and they couldn't lie anymore. They couldn't lie their way out of the corner, and they finally had to admit that they had been emitting these illegal levels of pollution. What they do is they come into the communities, they go into states where they feel like the standards or the oversight is lax, and they go into states with high poverty rates and make promises of jobs. And then they will claim that they're going to be emitting just below the 250-ton limit that will require them to have better controls and oversight. So most of them will come in and say that they're going to be emitting 250 tons, but then immediately, as soon as they start operating, they're emitting well beyond that. So the same company, Drax, that had these illegal levels of emissions in Mississippi, a year later, they didn't learn their lesson. And of course, I don't know how they would anyway, because that fine is basically a slap on the wrist. Then they were fined again $3.2 million, and this was for 2 of their facilities in Louisiana. So the first thing I did was looked up the demographics in those locations, and you can see in Bastrop, Louisiana, the demographics here. You have 78.9% Black population and a 41.9% poverty rate. In Urania, Louisiana, you have the 60% white and 34, over a third Black, and a small group of indigenous population. But again, one thing that is always going to be there is a high poverty rate, and that 40% poverty rate. This to me is where the morality issue comes in, because poor people are being exploited, and they're clearly putting profit over people. There is a facility that's just been permitted about 30 miles from where I live in Bond, Mississippi, and they keep calling this investment. They're making investment into the South, but what they're not talking about is how they're going to be having these facilities operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Communities can't sleep. In addition to being exposed to all of these toxic chemicals, you have the noise pollution. And so you have, I mentioned earlier, a conveyor belt of trucks coming into these communities every 3 minutes. And these are things that they don't talk about, and they're taking advantage, they're exploiting poor communities, and saying that basically they're doing them a favor, they are investing in the communities. And it's not worth the trade-off, definitely. It's not worth the trade-off for our communities. It's not worth the trade-off for our climate. And I'm going to be following, I'll be leaving this weekend, following this trail of deceit, going actually from Mississippi I'll be going into London and speaking at the proxy for DRAX for their shareholders meeting, and will actually be going up to Yorkshire, Yorkshire, UK, when I leave London to see where the burning. So I'll actually be following the trail from the cutting of the trees and the manufacturing of the wood pellets to the burning of our forests once I go there. And we've been trying to get a meeting with the CEO of DRAX. He has thus far. He's going to be too busy to meet with some of the people from frontline communities who will be in London attending the shareholders meeting. So the map on the other side will show you, you'll see where the red mark is showing. That's the majority of our exports from the US that goes into the UK. And those are some of the other places where biomass is being shipped, wood biomass is being shipped from the US to some of the other locations. We do know that Japan and other countries in Asia have been coming to the US, to the Southeast US, and they have been looking at some of these facilities. We actually hosted a delegation from Japan last year who did a tour of some of the facilities because their government is really interested in this, and everyone is looking at this. And what's very unfortunate is that when you attend UN meetings, COP meetings, and you hear countries talking about reaching their nationally determined contributions, getting their emissions down. And what is happening is biomass is not being properly accounted, and countries are getting credit for getting their emissions down by simply not properly accounting the emissions, because these emissions are as much, if not more, than coal. So this is just some of the forest fuel foolery, because saying that wood biomass is clean and safe is anything but. And we know that burning wood for energy will not stabilize our climate. We have here, and I'm going to end, just show you a few resources. This is where one of Enviva's whistleblowers claim, debunk their claim that wood biomass is good for the planet, and call it all nonsense. And they're actually clear cutting trees. And this is where DRAX will say, where they are talk about how many jobs they have added in Louisiana and Mississippi. These are not jobs that go to local people. It doesn't matter, because the community is being harmed by this. And human health cannot be sacrificed in exchange for jobs. These are two excellent resources. This is one by EIP, a research that they did, Dirty Deception, How the Wood Biomass Industry Skirts the Clean Air Act. And it gives a breakdown of all of these industries in the US. And also Burn by Dogwood Alliance has several different documentaries that they have done, and very, very good information. And these are just some other resources in case people are interested in getting more information. This was a demonstration that was done in the UK during Parliament on last year. And this is actually a train. These wood pellets are shipped over the ocean, and then they're trucked, and then they're shipped, and then they're trained in to various locations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was, I mean, every time I hear about how they cite these plants and the impacts they're having to communities, it just breaks my heart. And then to have politicians acting like this is something that's truly gonna create better jobs or stem the climate crisis. I just hope a lot of people on this webinar will join us in trying to push back on this really destructive industry. So now that we've heard a little bit about what is happening and has been happening for decades and decades in the Southeast, where they're cutting down mostly hardwood trees and polluting the areas by turning them into wood pellets, which mostly get shipped over to Europe to be burned as quote unquote clean energy. We're now going to take a look at what biomass is on the West Coast. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Maya Khosla. She is a wildlife biologist and writer, and she has documented for us fire scientists, firefighters, talking about how we can be wise about wildfire and protect communities without destroying our forests. She gathers scientific data. She's an amazing filmmaker. She's a writer with an award-winning book on poetry entitled All the Fires of Wind and Light. Take it away, Maya.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you so much, Kathy, for your incredible moving presentation. I'm going to follow up with what is now sort of the beginning of an investigation on West biomass energy in the West, focusing mostly on California, also a little bit of Oregon. And I'm going to just try to share my screen with the presentation. So let me know if this, if you can see it. So a second here. Let's see, got a slideshow. All right, I'm gonna stop the slideshow. Can you see the slideshow?
Right now we see you are sharing your screen, but
Yes.
there's nothing on it yet. It's just the black background.
Oh yeah, that happened before. So let me try again. I'm gonna go back to stop sharing. Give me a second. That happened once before. I'm gonna go ahead and try and share again. I'm gonna start this slideshow here. So let's see, stop. Interesting. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, we can, Maya. If you just hit start your slideshow, we'll be able to see the slides one at a time.
Yeah, that sounds good. I did start it, and this is a retry. So can you see one slide, a single slide?
Not yet.
No, we see the slide and then we see the deck to the left.
Okay, so you're not seeing a single slide.
Not yet.
Okay, because I did start the slideshow. Hold on a second. All right, my apologies. I gotta, this actually worked before. We kind of did a little run through. So let me see. Sure. I mean, I might have to just go to the PowerPoint if this doesn't show, but let me try again. Are you seeing a single slide now?
Yes,
Yeah, now we are.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting that it just wasn't, it wasn't seeing it. And anyway, following from Katherine, I just reiterating the idea that the biomass energy generation is burning actually some of the largest trees, and it's a myth that it just takes slash and small trees, where small is not usually defined in terms of size. It's not renewable, and it's just like anywhere else. It's using massive subsidies, including tax dollars. So the slight difference here is that in California specifically, also elsewhere in the West, where wildfire is an issue, backcountry logging is being done in the name of fire safety, and it's not making us safer. So let's see. Are you seeing the next slide?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, so here's a photo right after the 2020 glass fire of a home that actually stayed standing. And there's a second home to the far right. You could see up the hill there, far right of the photo. It's the same homeowner who did all the defensible space and home hardening required to keep a home safe. And as Jack Cohen says, despite this incredible knowledge base with decades and decades worth of case studies and data, thousands of case studies, we're putting all as in the government, is putting all its efforts into the most difficult margins of control. And it's a brand new film called Elemental that has just been released recently, where he just explains what it takes to be safe. And as you can see, and I've documented this time and again, after wildfires, that there are certain homes that really take all the precautions required and they can stay safe, but it really has nothing to do with cutting down forests and fuels reductions, which I really like, the idea of the word foolery being associated with fuels reductions too. And so forest-based biomass, unbeknownst to most people, and I am routinely astonished with how people assume that it's just the small stuff at the slash that's being taken to support forest-based biomass. Even the lumber that's taken out, a huge amount of it is used for burning and that's specifically why, and I will show you and share, that bioenergy facilities are next to lumberyard facilities, because they're both taking one and another of the fractions. And so a lot of the huge fraction of really large wood is being used for biomass energy. And as one of the things that is interesting in a lot of the surveys I've done, this one with, I was on the ground with Tanya Chi, my colleague, who later published her work with Dr. Chad Hansen on forest regeneration after wildfire. You can see that the largest trees have already been taken out before the fire. We saw this time and again. And then the fire burns, it whipped through with high severity in this part of Stanislaus National Forest. And here's Mendocino National Forest. And this photograph of northern spotted owl, we're talking about who's paying the price for biomass energy. This photograph of northern spotted owl was taken about 50 to 60 feet away from a proposed clear cut. So far, it hasn't been done, but we can never count on that. So this is all publicly owned forests. There's federal, state, and county level forests that are just going down, falling to support bioenergy that's being called carbon neutral, it's being called renewable. And it also comes from private lands. In fact, a huge fraction of, I mean, there's a really big push to convince the public that they're going to be more fire safe if they cut down a lot of their trees. This photo is taken in Lassen County in a private forest right after the 2021 Dixie fire. You can see most of these trees are alive, but a close look at these trees, it's not in the photo, but a close look at these trees, you see that every single one of the largest trees is being marked for cutting down. And I talked to one of the truckers who was not going to Lassen County bioenergy facility. He was going to Shasta Green. He was going far away. So there is that factor too. Other wildlife that I documented, this is also one of the doomed forests in Lassen, is American badger, which is, and these are all wild species that are very much dependent on these forests, in addition to all the plants, soils, waters. And this is a photograph from Sonoma County. It's the young bobcat, really close to, I would say, maybe 300 to 400 feet away from one of the clear cuts. And another photograph here of a fisher that's in a forest that experienced the 2013 rimfire, Tuolumne County. And what's interesting here is this slash or the log that has fallen here, I have seen over and over again these animals use them as paths through the forest, viewing stations, refuges, escape routes, and because it offers them a view. So cleansing the forests, and I was alarmed to hear a UC Berkeley student recently talk about cleaning up of forests. What we call cleanup, forests don't really need cleanup. They need to be just left in place because it's the carbon that's being removed when they're being so-called cleanup. And that's where it goes. This is Scotia, the town of Scotia Lumberyard, which, as I mentioned earlier, is really right next door to the Eel River Bioenergy. It's a massive facility, and routinely taking the large trees, and of course, anything that is not used for lumber goes straight to biomass. And that transportation process, I was surprised to, because I was an inspector in one of the wood yards a while ago, and they were recording truckers going all the way to Chinese Camp, which is Yosemite, from Sonoma County, or 180 miles, more than 180 miles away to Eel River Bioenergy. And they were just being weighed on the way in and weighed on the way out. And one of the truckers, actually, he's close to retirement, talked about the wood chips catching fire in the back of the truck, because it's an exothermic reaction when it's all piled up at the back of the truck. And it's warming and, often catches fire. I've seen them smoking, but I've never seen them catch fire. But he said that's one of the dangers of transporting this material hundreds of miles away. And of course, as you can see, this is a different view of Scotia, the Eel River Bioenergy, which is sort of covering the town with smog. The local residents have complained about lung diseases, but the Air Resources Board has actually not listened to them. I know it will not come as a surprise to some of you, but what's interesting about Scotia is that it was out of business until recently. It's not like one of those old biomass plants that have been in business the whole time. Around about 2019, there was a government agency that wanted to give renewable energy contracts out, and they were pretty much all given out to bioenergy facilities, and Scotia was one of them that got revamped, and it reopened despite almost 800 signatures against the facility signed by local residents. And then this is Calpella, similar problems, except a completely different facility, which is doing what I call doubly dangerous processing, because the first step is a very dangerous emissions heavy processing where the biomass is ground up and then compacted into pellets. And then the second step is transporting over to where it's going to be burned in a bioenergy facility. Here again, local residents, including Pomo tribe members, have complained about effects on their lungs and other diseases. I just wanted to switch back to where the biomass energy is coming from and how we're seeing such rapid depletion in forests. There's 2 or 3 things that happen. One of them is forest thinning. Like they're all the same. They're all logging, very heavy duty logging. But one of the things that happens that I mentioned earlier is forest thinning, which is very much supporting bioenergy right now. There's a huge push in Sonoma County, the county where I live, to push to increase bioenergy by local commercial enterprises. And the idea is, and a lot of people are really convinced about this, but they don't see the reality out afield, which is that forest thinning is going to result in calming fire down and turning a fierce high severity fire into a low severity beneficial fire, which is problematic anyway, because high severity has its role. It's a fraction of the entire fire in a wildfire situation. But what's really interesting is over and over again, not just 1 or 2 acres, but mile after mile, what I've noticed while I'm out doing field surveys is that you'll see some of the remnants of a really large tree in the foreground, or several stumps that have burned during the fire. This is the 2020 August Complex Fire in Mendocino National Forest. And in the back, you'll see all the small trees that burned with high severity. And the same is true of Lassen National Forest. This, of course, unfortunately, has already been logged, so you can't see that the small trees were left after thinning. But you can see that the large trees were taken out, which is a huge carbon footprint, because that's where the focus is. It's a commercial focus, so they're taking out the largest trees. And this is Stanislaus National Forest, which I showed one photograph earlier. And it's a different area of Stanislaus, where again, you can see the largest trees taken out and then the fire whipping through these areas dominated by tiny trees. So the other aspect of, the other side of removal is post-fire removal, which was in this photograph, it was years and years after the 2013 rim fire. They took out swaths of forest that were dominated by snags, but there were lots of young live trees. Well, I think you can see in the foreground quite plain as day what's happening to those young live trees after the cutting is done, because as careful as the loggers might be, they can't seem to avoid the impact of heavy equipment, drying out of the soil, and sometimes, of course, hitting the trees, because you can't avoid every small sapling or seedling in the way, on their way to getting out all the large trees and snags. And so you see massive mortality of all the regeneration that's being taken place. And of course, this was millions and millions of dollars supported by housing and urban development, supposedly for fire safety and restoration. So, and right next to, up the hill from that last photograph, was a northern goshawk family I haven't seen since. I've been checking every year since the logging took place. Goshawks are pretty shy and very sensitive, and of course, logging 50 to 100 feet next door is not going to promote living there anymore. So it's not just impacting us. Biomass is basically resulting in disappearances. I mean, I'm actually seeing these disappearances afield. I'll see something one season and never see it again. And that's happening over and over again. This is a young fisher that was seen in Lassen shortly after the Dixie fire, but not seen again. This whole area is slated for clear cutting. In fact, most of it's on one side of a small creek, and most of it's called Yellow Creek, and the other side of it is all logged already. So that's where I want to end, and giving you a glimpse of some of the other faces that suffer losses during the biomass process. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Maya. And just one follow-up. In the West, they're not really manufacturing wood pellets at this point, right? They're basically taking the whole trees, turning them into chips and burning them in biomass energy facilities in California. Is that correct?
Calpella is 100% pellet production. It's
Oh,
on the,
really?
yeah, it's on the east side of Ukiah 101 as you go through Ukiah.
Okay, and where are they sending their pellets? Are they basically domestic use, or are they also shipping them?
They're being very secretive. Basically, I think it's partly going overseas. And the reason I think that is because I was listening to an RCEA meeting. That's the agency that funded Scotia and brought it back to life, so to speak. And they were saying, you know, of course, we're shipping the pellets overseas right now, but we want them here. So that was just part of a, a longer sentence. There is also, as Shaye might mention, there's a massive effort to introduce 2 large pellet projects. But that's, you know, Calpella is the only one I've seen, but I haven't seen them all. I'm still like on the front end of the investigation.
Right. But are they also simply taking material from the forest, chipping it and burning it in an energy generation facility in California?
Yes,
that-
that's so Scotia, the Scotia Eel River Bioenergy, Shasta Green, Pacific Ultra Power east of Chinese Camp. All of those are bioenergy facilities, typically located very close to large lumber yards that sort of pick and choose, and then a vast majority of it from appearances, a vast majority of it goes to the biomass facility.
Okay. And Kathy, just kind of a follow-up to help people understand what are the similarities and differences between the Southeast and the West. Are most of the facilities that were on your maps, are those mostly pellet production facilities, or are they mostly biomass energy generation facilities?
All of them are shipped.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so that is a little bit of a difference. And on the east, they're using mostly hardwoods to create the pellets. And Maya, on the west, are they doing both soft and hardwood pellets, like pellets made from pine?
Oh yes, they're using, to my knowledge, they're using everything.
I'm going to say the same thing, Rachel. I don't, you know, it's mostly hardwood, but from my understanding, they will take any type of wood.
Put anything in.
Yes,
Oh my God.
even wetlands, even, you know, they're even destroying precious wetlands.
Wow. Okay. Worse than I thought. All right. Thank you both, Kathy and Maya. And now we will continue our presentation with Shaye Wolf. She is with the Center of Biological Diversity's Climate Law Institute. She co-authored the CBD Forest Biomass Briefing book, Forest Biomass Energy is a False Solution, which is very much focused on biomass in California. She provides scientific support for the center's campaigns to protect people and wildlife from the climate crisis. And she is going to enlighten us about the true climate impacts of this very dirty fuel. Shaye, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Here, I'm going to get my presentation going. Can you see that? Okay.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. And as Kathy and Maya really highlight in so many ways, forest biomass energy is harmful to the climate, community, and forests. It's a false solution. And I'm going to focus on the climate harms from biomass energy and also from some emerging threats, ways that the industry, biomass industry, is trying to get public money to expand biomass energy. And see. Not able to advance. Let's see. That's weird. I never had that happen. That's really strange. Okay, hang on a second. Let me stop sharing and try and
It
reshare.
might take a minute, Shaye. That's what happened with me. It just took a minute.
Okay.
Happened to me
Are you
too.
seeing that now?
You're not sharing at the
Oh,
moment.
sorry. Okay, let me do that again. Here we go. Let's see. Okay. Yes. Okay.
So, yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. So forest biomass energy is a triple hit to the climate. And I think this quote from Mary Booth at Partnership for Policy Integrity really summarizes it well. That forest biomass energy increases emissions to the atmosphere, it decreases the forest carbon sinks, and it soaks up subsidies that could instead be used for real genuine clean energy and energy efficiency. And you know, as Kathy and Maya showed, like there is climate pollution and air pollution at every stage of making woody biomass energy. I mean, it starts with logging the forest with heavy machinery and disturbing those forest soils, releasing the soil carbon. Then those cut trees are trucked often very long distances. They are processed, you know, cut, chipped, and dried. They are stored in these huge piles, and those piles generate a lot of methane. And then they're burned for electricity, and that immediately releases all of the trees' stored carbon to the atmosphere. And then, like is happening in the Southeast in particular, like wood pellets, when wood pellets are used to make biomass energy, you're adding even more stages of pollution. So you're starting with the logging and the trucking, but then you're manufacturing pellets at the wood mills, which is wood pellet mills, which is very energy intensive. And then because most of those pellets are exported overseas, you have to transport the pellets by rail or truck. You store the pellets in these big silos at ports. And those pellets, I think as Maya talked about, they are prone to spontaneous combustion. So those silos, those wood pellet silos have a high risk of fire and explosion. And they're also producing those methane emissions. Then the pellets need to be loaded onto tankers and shipped overseas to markets in the EU and UK and Asia, where they are burned and converted coal-fired power plants. So there is a lot of emissions coming from the kind of that wood pellet, the wood kind of supply chain, the kind of upstream emissions. And then when you get to that last stage of burning the wood for energy, that is more climate polluting at the smokestack than coal. So as this figure shows, when you look at the kind of carbon dioxide emissions per unit of energy produced, burning biomass to make electricity emits about 1.5 times the carbon dioxide of coal and about 3 to 4 times the carbon dioxide of fossil gas for each unit of energy produced. So biomass is like more like fossil fuels. It's a carbon emitting form of energy, but it's categorized as renewable alongside solar and wind energy, and it receives lots of subsidies and incentives at the state and federal level. And so it's clearly really dirty. Why is it being falsely claimed and categorized to be a climate solution? And of course, there is lots of biomass industry and timber industry disinformation. And so we're going to just walk through some of the industry's key claims, and Kathy has already highlighted some of these. And these have all been thoroughly debunked by science and evidence. So the kind of long-standing claim of the biomass industry is that biomass energy is carbon neutral because new tree growth will offset the carbon pollution released from burning wood for energy, released from the smokestack. And this has been thoroughly refuted by scientific studies, the IPCC, the EPA scientific advisory body. And that's because the reality is the first that like forest regrowth takes time. So it takes many, many years. It takes a really long time for that tree that was cut for biomass to grow large enough to store and sequester the same amount of carbon as those kind of complex carbon-rich forests that were cut down. And then forests like regrowth is after cutting is uncertain, because there's no guarantee that those forests that were cut for biomass energy are allowed to fully regrow instead of being cut again and again, or that those cut forests don't get converted to other land uses. And then there's a carbon sequestration opportunity cost. And what I mean by that is that when a tree is cut for biomass energy, when it's burned for energy, all of that its carbon is released to the atmosphere, but it's also no longer able to sequester, to draw down and sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So we're really missing out on all that additional carbon dioxide that could have been drawn down by those forests had they not been cut for biomass energy. So, as a result of all that, even if forests are allowed to regrow, and even if you use really optimistic assumptions, burning wood for energy increases carbon emissions in the atmosphere for decades to centuries. And that's, so problematic because we are, biomass energy is worsening the climate emergency at a time, and we need this decade right now to be rapidly cutting emissions by half to kind of meet that Paris Agreement, 1.5 degree climate limit. So and this Maya and Kathy talked about this too. So another industry claim is, we're just burning waste, and that would have decomposed and released carbon dioxide, otherwise. But there's no real standardized definition of waste. I mean, often it refers to branches or treetops or bark or other wood that's considered low value. But even if you just burn forest residue or waste for biomass energy, it still leads to a net increase of carbon emissions in the atmosphere for decades. And if you hadn't burned that, that material, those branches and treetops would have slowly decomposed on the forest floor, and they would have helped build soil carbon, and they would have provided nutrients to the forest ecosystem. And as we've heard, biomass power plants are typically not burning, waste. They are using whole trees. They are doing large clear cuts, and this is a photo of a large clear cut in the southeastern United States for biomass energy, and also they're doing clear cuts of post-fire forests as well. And because those biomass plants need to, hour by hour, day by day, year by year, they are taking in all of these trees. They need to be fed, that it leads to an increase in logging, and there's an estimate that the United States has lost over 1 million acres of forest due to wood pellet biomass production. So that's huge. Another claim from the industry is that thinning is needed to prevent wildfire emissions. If we don't cut it down, it'll burn up type of argument. And the science and the reality, the science shows, and the reality is that thinning releases more carbon emissions than it prevents from being released in a wildfire and wildfires. And one study estimated 3 times more. And so studies that looked at the kind of cumulative mortality or cumulative carbon loss from thinned and unthinned forests that have experienced wildfire show this squarely. There are field studies showing this, and field studies, also show that most carbon is retained in the forest after wildfire, and even in severe wildfire. So a recent study showed that even very severe fire combusts about less than 2% of the living tree biomass on average. So most of what's being burned is the really small stuff, like leaves and very small branches. And most, like that photo on the lower right shows a snag forest with mostly dead trees after high severity fire. Even in those forests, in those settings, most of the carbon is retained in the forest. And so the big carbon emitter is logging. And there's one study estimated that logging in US forests emits much more, 10 times more carbon than fire, native insects, and drought combined. And kind of one final main industry claim that I wanted to address is that logging and thinning is needed for wildfire safety, and Maya addressed this. And the reality is that logging and thinning forest is not effective for reducing wildfire intensity. And in fact, it can often make fires burn hotter and faster, and it is not effective for protecting communities during wildfire. And what is effective is this community fire safety retrofits, like directly focused on homes and the communities themselves. And that means that looks like home hardening. So retrofitting like homes and structures with fire resistant roofing and putting vents or screens on exterior vents on homes, doing installing air filters to filter kind of for smoke filtration, and doing defensible space work, which is some vegetation kind of trimming immediately around the home, and then prioritizing the investments in fire safety in disadvantaged communities. And this is a elemental that image shows is a recent documentary that does a really good job sharing the science on community wildfire safety. Okay, so yes, so I think, it's really clear that, that biomass energy is this triple hit to the climate, and increasing emissions, reducing the forest carbon sink, and then taking funding away from real energy solutions. And I wanted to spend the last bit talking about emerging threats. So some ways that the biomass industry is trying to get public money and public subsidies to kind of expand biomass energy. And one of those ways is called biomass energy with carbon capture and storage. And so that is putting carbon capture and storage, or CCS, equipment onto biomass power plants, purportedly to capture the carbon emissions that are coming out of the smokestack at the biomass plants. And this is putting two polluting, dangerous technologies together, because CCS has proven to be an industry distraction or industry scam that is ineffective, it's unsafe, it's unnecessary, and it's very expensive. And so I just wanted to spend a little time on CCS and BECCS. And in terms of being ineffective, like the CCS proponents will say that CCS can capture about 90% of the carbon dioxide from an industrial smokestack. And this does not happen in practice, when studies that have looked at projects in practice have found that most CCS projects have failed or are really vastly underperforming in capturing the CO2 from the smokestack, often by more than half of what they promised. CCS is unsafe in many ways. One way is that it increases air pollution at the facilities and upstream. So it's increasing air pollution for local communities. And that's largely because CCS equipment takes a lot of energy to run. It's very energy intensive. It uses and burns more energy, and it produces more pollution, both at the facility site and upstream. And then also when carbon dioxide is captured from the smokestack, it's transported in pipelines and often put into some storage sites. And pipeline ruptures and storage leaks are really dangerous. And that's because that compressed CO2, when it leaks out, it forms an invisible, dense, cold cloud that sinks to the ground, and it can sicken people, and it can suffocate people and other animals. So it's very dangerous. And it's unnecessary. BECCS and CCS are not needed to limit global temperature rise to the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris Climate Agreement limit. There are 1.5 degrees Celsius pathways that do not use BECCS and CCS, but instead require or more rapid phase out of fossil fuels, which is what we need to be doing. And it's very expensive. It relies on massive public subsidies. And I just wanted to point out this picture. In California, where I do a lot of my work, most of the CCS projects that are being proposed in the state are BECCS projects. And this is the Mendota biomass facility that was closed down successfully by the local community because of all the pollution. all the harms to people's health and lungs. And so this company proposed to reopen it as a BECCS facility, to attach CCS equipment to it. And so far, the community has been very successful in kind of stalling out this project. But you can see in this picture, the local high school and then the biomass facility very nearby. It's right next to the community. And I also, just finally on CCS, wanted to illustrate that the carbon dioxide that is captured from the smokestack, most of it ends up back, a lot of it at least ends up back in the atmosphere. So in this figure, the CO2 that would be diverted from the smokestack on the top part of the figure, in the United States, like 95% of carbon captured from CCS projects is used to extract oil out of the ground. And so that is worsening the climate crisis, heating up the planet more. Some of it is proposed to be injected in high pressure and stored underground in perpetuity. And of course, there are many ways that that CO2 is inevitably going to leak and harm the climate and communities. There are multiple pathways through which it can leak. And then some of it is proposed to be used to make plastics and produce plastic pollution, or synthetic fuels which are emitting carbon dioxide. So this BECCS and CCS are very, very problematic and polluting. And then the second kind of fall solution that's emerging is making hydrogen from biomass. And this is not clean hydrogen, this is dirty hydrogen. So in the United States, 99% of hydrogen is right now made from fossil fuels. And there are now proposals to make hydrogen from biomass through a gasification process or a process called pyrolysis. And this is basically like turning biomass into gases through using heat and water. And so you produce some hydrogen through this process, but you also produce mostly carbon dioxide, you produce methane, and you produce air pollution. So this is very harmful to the climate and communities, this sort of process. And then all hydrogen, whether it's made from dirty sources like fossil fuels and biomass or not, shares some problems in that it's dangerous to transport, that it is more explosive and more corrosive to pipelines than methane is, and it's super leaky. So, and that's a problem because it is a potent indirect greenhouse gas. It heats the climate 100 times more than carbon dioxide over a 10-year period. So these, BECCS, biomass with CCS, and making hydrogen from biomass are also very harmful to the climate and communities, and of course, forests where the material is sourced from. So I just wanted to end on some science and justice-based solutions. And that would be ending the mandates and the subsidies for biomass energy and BECCS and hydrogen from biomass. And instead, I'm doing what Kathy highlighted, doing that just transition toward clean energy, rooftop solar, wind, energy storage, energy efficiency, and energy with energy access to all, clean energy access. The second, is protecting forests from deforestation and degradation. That's a very critical part of the climate solution because forests are these natural carbon sponges. And then focusing the forest wildfire policy and funding on those proven home and community focused wildfire safety approaches like home hardening and defensible space. So reject solutions and really putting our investment and intention in solutions that work for all of us. So I'm gonna end there.
If you want to wrap it.
Great. Thank you so much, Shaye, for wrapping that all together for everyone. And I'm going to shift us to gallery view now. And we have quite a few questions. So, and about 16 minutes left. So we are going to try to just get through as many as we possibly can. Some of them seem like they're directed at particular presenters, but all of you feel free to weigh in on them if you have a contribution you want to make. So the first one, I think would be most directed at Kathy. And someone was wondering if you could expand on what you mean by EJ states. You're muted.
Those are environmental justice communities. Again, it goes by the demographics, racial and economic demographics. And most of the EJ states are in the Southeast US.
Great, thank you. And then a follow-up to that, and this I think could be for both the Southeast and the West. But can you tell us a little bit about how elected officials in the impacted communities have responded to the citizens' concerns and whether or not they are working to restrict wood pellet mills or whether they are promoting the mills as fiscally good for the community?
Let me say, oddly enough, the people in Gloucester had no idea that they had been exposed to these high levels of toxin until we went there and told them. And the mayor of the city, again, he boasted about what good corporate partners they were and how they had invested into to upgrade their water system. Well, they're good at their foolery. They're good at what they do. I don't even think the mayor knew that they needed to upgrade the water system because they needed it for their business. They needed to manufacture the wood pellets. So they weren't doing it out of the goodness of their heart or to be good, corporate neighbors. The regulatory agency, nobody knew, the residents had no idea that they had been fined and exposed. And most people simply don't know. This is a very complicated matter. They bill themselves as green and safe. And so trying to explain it, and it's easier for people to understand the need to have a roof over your family's head tonight and food on their table this evening than it is to explain and start talking about CO2 and GHG.
Yeah, Maya or Shaye, have you guys had any interactions with communities in the West and the politicians who serve those communities and their take on biomass, whether they're concerned about their constituents or just interested in, bringing business to their district?
I have one from an interview, somebody talking about unidentified Scotia residents say air quality board, do something. My children are coughing themselves to sleep at night, and no response from the air quality board.
Yeah, and I think in California, a lot of the biomass power plants are located in the Central Valley, and they're near communities of color and low income communities, and those communities have been, the frontline communities have been successful in some fights in shutting the biomass plants down, but that there hasn't been, it's been a largely ignored issue. Like people are really hurting and their health is hurting, their lungs are hurting, and it's unfortunately been very ignored by elected officials, and it's really taken this really strong community activism to get action in many cases.
So do any of you have thoughts or information in relation to how Japan planning to ramp up their biomass energy industry is going to affect, the West Coast or the Southeast markets for pellets?
We have a list of the proposed sites. It's frightening. We are working along with frontline communities, are working with UK activists, as well as I mentioned in my presentation, we actually met with the Japanese delegation who came here. I've been interviewed by Japanese media. So we are at least at this point, not only appealing to our elected officials, our congressional, local, state, and federal officials here, but also appealing to try and cut off the demand so that this will help. Just appealing from the a moral sense.
Yeah, I think that is really important, Kathy. And in the West Coast, so in California, I mean, as we talked about, I mean, mostly we have biomass facilities that are burning wood chips and not pellets. There's like 2 very small scale pellet facilities, but most of like 24 or 25 that most of them in California are wood chips. But there is this proposal for this enormous wood pellet project that would have 2 wood pellet mills in the Sierra Nevada, and they would have the capacity for like 1 million metric tons of wood pellet production per year. So these are enormous in the size of like the really big Enviva wood pellet mills that are devastating like the Southeast. So this has been proposed, this project, and it's the markets that have been talked about are mostly exporting these pellets to Japanese markets, although there's some also maybe some export potentially to the EU and the UK. But that there is a big need to not let the wood pellet industry get a foothold in the West Coast, and really actively oppose these projects, these really dangerous projects.
So Rachel, they're talking about now, their contract signed. This would be more of a problem on the West Coast to use aviation forests for aviation fuel.
Yeah, someone actually, I was just gonna read a question about that. They're talking about Rebecca in Utah is saying biomass plants are being proposed to collect, as Maya was talking about, the fuels reduction, forest thinning material. And one of the big selling points is turning it into sustainable jet fuel. So they were wondering if there are any tips or studies on refuting this sustainable fuel myth.
I know that Alaska Airlines first used jet fuel from forest residuals in 2016. I'm not sure if it continues. I know they continue to promote biofuels.
Yeah, Yes, I think in California and federally, I think there's this big push to use the sustainable aviation fuels, so biofuels from using different feedstocks, and forests are one of them, and there are other feedstocks too, like crops, and there's a whole range. Our senior scientist here, John Fleming, did a report recently. I could maybe put the link, evaluating the sustainable aviation fuels from different feedstocks along different criteria, and including climate, environmental justice criteria, and the vast majority they're almost they're very problematic across all of those different dimensions. And of course the forest feedstock is really problematic, but that might be a good resource for folks to look at.
Yeah, if you could drop that in the chat, I'll move it over to the Q&A so people can access it. That would be great. So Laura has a question for you, Shaye. Making hydrogen from biomass is indeed dirty, but is it considered green hydrogen?
That is an open question right now, because green hydrogen is being defined in different ways. So some people, we would define green hydrogen as hydrogen that is, made from, splitting water using clean renewable electricity, so just solar and wind. But there are bigger definitions that say when using renewable energy, and of course biomass gets defined as renewable energy, and also factory farm gas. Biomethane gets defined in many states and federally as renewable energy. So these very dirty feedstocks can be considered to be feedstocks for green hydrogen, and that's really problematic. That needs to be shut down. That those feedstocks should not be included in the definition of green electrolytic hydrogen.
But now it's kind of basically open to whatever level of government is defining it. There isn't a clear definition anywhere. And like many other dirty fuels, it is being included as green.
Yeah, in the Inflation Reduction Act, they define, like, they have a kind of emission standard for green hydrogen that really lets in lots of dirty hydrogen, like hydrogen, fossil fuel hydrogen with CCS, or probably biomass hydrogen would be qualify under that definition, depending on like the faulty carbon accounting that you could do to make it qualify. So that's a very active kind of area right now.
Okay, this one is for Maya. From Shanna. I've heard a widespread argument that setting fires or thinning forests around where fires often occur is somehow undoing the damage we previously did by putting out wildfires over the last half century. Do you feel this is a legitimate argument? And do you think the current models are updated enough to make this argument?
Just so I understand it correctly. So in other words, prescribed fires replacing natural fires? Is that?
Well, that prescribed fire or thinning, aka logging, is somehow undoing damage that has been done by there not being fire.
Oh, yeah. So, wildfire is a wonderful reset button. It does not, it is tragic when it impacts communities, but as Shaye and the film Elemental really clearly delineates, there is so much that can be done, especially the decades of work by Jack Cohen very specifically says, fight it on the home front, so to create the safety. So once you're done with that safety part of it, to try to mimic wildfire with a combination of prescribed fire and thinning, from whatever I've seen, and that's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours on the ground, it has never, to my knowledge, been able to in any way mimic a wildfire and the benefits that it creates. Not only that, prescribed fire combined with thinning often removes, as you could see in the slides, the largest trees are selected. It's a commercial operation. They can't help it. They're coming in, they're looking for the biggest trees. The smallest little, I even heard Ron Good say this, they look like toothpicks, what's left on the ground. And that's actually true. How's a toothpick gonna burn relative to a large tree in a fire? It's just gonna go very quickly. And so and of course, as Brant Baker has said before, and probably many other people too, prescribed fire really includes this massive pile burning that I've seen everywhere in national forests. That's also called prescribed fire. They collect it in a big old pyramid and then they light fire to it. I've actually not seen areas that have experienced those types of prescribed fires burn down to silica, down to sand, and no growth. It's a circle of zero growth in those areas. I don't think prescribed fire and thinning can ever replace, natural fires and managed natural fires, like fires where people are acting with a lightning fire or a wildfire is going through and it's being managed so that it does its job of what a wildfire is supposed to do.
Yeah, and I would just follow up on that question, this idea that there's been damage to the ecosystem because fire's been excluded. I mean, that could possibly be the case, but a lot of these areas have 100-year or more fire rotation intervals. So these ecosystems are used to having long periods of time without fire, and then they're used to having periods of time where there's a lot of frequent fire, including mixed severity fire, low, moderate, and high. So I think that it's probably not the best place to start from, thinking that there's damage that's been done from excluding fire. We shouldn't be excluding fire in these areas, and we can change that, but simply taking that action of changing that allows things to reset. So I don't know if that was helpful or made any sense, but our forests know what they're doing. They've got this. Let's see. Oh, so going back to the pile burning, Maya, one of our attendees is concerned that maybe the film Elemental doesn't fully make the distinction between pile burning and broadcast burning. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's only so much a film can do. Elemental really focuses on, I would say, 3 or 4 really basic phenomena, which is like how to create a fire-safe home, and Jack Cohen's meticulous studies, the Yurok tribe and all the fire that the good fires that they've been lighting for certain purposes for eons and now continuing, and what the job that natural wildfire does, and of course the Paradise tragedy and related tragedies that have happened across the state of California. So I can't see, I think it's a really huge subject. It's hard for someone to grab everything in that, but yes, the idea of prescribed fire, and I'm sure it can be done well in some places by well-meaning people. I'm just giving examples that I've seen on the ground. By the way, I do want to add that every single one of the photos I showed of the wildlife that are suffering, I'm seeing disappearances literally by the year. From year to year, I'll come back and they won't be there anymore. Those are all areas which experienced a wildfire. After they experienced a wildfire, these animals came back in to make the best of a wonderful, bountiful situation where there's natural regeneration after wildfire.
Thanks, Maya. Okay, I'm just trying to scroll through these questions. Someone is asking, they've heard there is a history of cultural burning in California. Is this true, or were all historical fires wildfires? Do you want to take it?
I'm happy to start it, and then others can continue. I'm sure that there were combinations of, lightning never went away. It was always there. So there was always natural fires. Native Americans themselves they respect that. The, elders that we talk to, they respect that. And then cultural fires have been there for eons. I don't know how long they've been there, but I would imagine they've been there as long as the communities have, because they know how to. I even come from and have documented a community, East India and Nagaland, that does cultural fires on a yearly basis. 3 types of fires. They have 3 different names for it, and then they did it for fire safety around the homes. The one I was documenting. But yeah, it's a very similar, I think, pretty similar suite of types of fires that are lit by Native American communities. I think there's a scale issue, because there's, communities are not greedy. They want what they need. They want the basics of what they need. They don't want to have the whole forest. When it's all opened up to say, okay, we're inviting you to this other forest where you can treat 40,000 acres that have been thinned, that puts everyone in an awkward situation. It's just a reality that, communities have been focusing on their own needs and not miles and miles away where they didn't need to be. And so there's a proportion that's sort of going out of focus. There's the reality of the proportions that I feel like is not as much in focus as it needs to be.
just scrolling through the questions. There's a lot of questions. I think we'll take one more and then we will wrap it up, and we'll try to address any of the other questions we didn't get to in the materials we're going to send out afterwards. So one person is asking, are the producers of this type of wood pellets related or the same as the producers of US pellets for home heating? Because someone is pushing pellet stoves to replace gas furnaces in urban communities. So like if you go to, Home Depot and you buy a bag of pellets, are those pellets coming from these very large producers of wood pellets, or are those smaller industry? Does it matter?
To my knowledge, all of the pellets, the 4 largest offenders in the US, all of those are being shipped. They're not used for consumption here. I think those are much smaller companies. And they're not getting the type of subsidies that the foreign-based, the countries who are shipping their pellets to different countries, they're not getting those subsidies.
Yeah, I don't think Drax is doing packaging for home use.
Neither is In Vivo
Yeah,
or German pellets.
right. The market's just not big enough. But that being said, it is concerning to think that people are pushing to, go back to what we call the original fossil fuel for heating. So definitely something to keep an eye out in your community. It's just every layer, every level, from your town to international biomass markets. This is not the way to go for the planet, for our communities, and for biodiversity. So I would like to thank you ladies so much for being here and sharing your knowledge. I do this work and I learn something. So you guys are doing a great job. Can't wait to see your film, Maya. And Kathy, good luck with everything in London. And Shaye, thank you very much for keeping an eye on California. And I will be in the fight with you all as we face the next decade. Again, thank you everyone for attending, and we will be sending out a lot of information, including the slide decks and links to the webinar. And MC, if you want to hang out for a minute, I will touch base with you after. All right. Thanks, everybody.